Welcome to Jammin' with Jason Mefford, a show where we discuss topics relevant to chief audit executives and professionals in audit, risk, and compliance. We discuss the technical and soft skills needed to navigate the minefields of organizations. You hear best practices and practical advice for helping you advance your career, and we'll even talk about music, mindfulness, and psychology, because we can. So sit back and relax while you listen to the #1 podcast in the world for internal auditors, unscripted and unedited. Welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Hey, my friends, it's good to be back in a solo episode with you. Now, like I've been doing, let me just share a couple of comments that people have had. One kind of came in here from Mark Ollier that said, I just listened to the death of traditional auditing, and I couldn't agree more with what you say. Internal audit has to reinvent itself constantly to better serve its clients. So thank you, Mark. Appreciate that feedback. For those of you that are listening, send me some feedback like that as well, and you could be featured on a future episode. Now, before I get too much into today's discussion, I figured I probably need to do a little disclaimer at the beginning. So some of you that might have looked at the title are thinking, oh my goodness, Jason, are you advocating animal cruelty or violence? And I am not, okay? I have no use for violence in my life or for it in the world. But in fact, it just comes from a saying that's been around for over 100 years about beating a dead horse. And I know that some of you, English may not be your first language, so let me just kind of explain that as well. It's a metaphor that really kind of describes a particular effort just being a waste of time, because it's just as if you were, trying to encourage a horse to move along, but if the horse is dead, all the encouraging in the world isn't going to get it to move forward, okay? And so again, the analogy kind of comes back, and it actually reminds me of a joke. There was a couple, a man and a wife, and they have their wagon. Their horse is pulling the wagon, and the horse is kind of moving along, and then all of a sudden the horse stops. And so the man starts whipping the horse to try to get it to move along, and is cursing at it and says, "That's one." And after a little cajoling and whipping, then the horse starts moving again. And they go down the road for a little bit further, and then the horse just stops again. And so the man starts beating it and cursing at it again and says, "That's two." And finally, the horse ends up kind of, moving along a little bit. They start going down the road again, and the horse stops for a third time. And the man just pulls out his gun and shoots the horse. And his wife just, "What are you doing? How are we going to get home?" And he turns to her and he says, "That's one." Now, I think it's funny. And again, it's not about the violence. It's about, I wanted to use this as well as a way to describe sometimes how we act. Okay. And the fact that there are some efforts that internal audit continues to try to push along that are as big of a waste of time as beating a dead horse. And so today we're going to get in. I'm going to talk about some of these things, because honestly, my friends, if you're doing these things, it is time to stop doing them, because you're probably wasting your energy and you're likely damaging the reputation and relevance of internal audit in your organization. But let's go back to this little joke. And this happens often, right? Is that, again, when you think about that metaphor, why would a horse stop if it's walking along? It usually stops for a good reason, right? Often it senses that maybe there's a snake or there's some other danger in the area. And so it doesn't want to move forward, right? But instead, the human who's trying to drive it is thinking, come on, go, 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 right? And is trying to beat it into submission to make it continue to go, even though the horse doesn't want to go. Now, often it is that way in our life as well. Sometimes we're, figuratively beating the horse, trying to move something forward that is not in our best interest. Okay. And, we're convinced that we have to move forward. We have to keep doing this. And so we keep beating and we keep trying and we keep going and we keep going. But the problem is, again, there's probably some reason why that horse is stopping. And so we need to actually stop and think about that. And that's, again, what I'm talking about today. Somebody else this week on a social media post called me a myth buster, and I thought that was great because I love that show Mythbusters on TV, and that we need more myth busters out there, because a lot of the things that we believe or that we think are not actually true. And so sometimes, again, it's not for me to be mean or anything like that, because I love you. I mean, that's why I'm here. But what I'm trying to get you to do is just to think and think about what is going to be in your best interest. Okay. And so, again, really, that's what I'm trying to do. Not advocating violence, not advocating beating horses, but thinking about, because there are some things that you are probably doing that are not very effective, and you need to stop them, or you could damage the reputation and relevance of internal audit. And we don't want that. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump in. There's a couple of bullet points that I kind of wanted to go through and talk to you today about. And the first one is, you might have heard me talking about this before, but the fact that a lot of times, in internal audit, we believe that independence and objectivity are the biggest things. That's what we have to focus on. And so what I find is so many people focusing on independence and objectivity instead of focusing on relationships, or their belief that if I develop relationships with people in my organization, then I somehow lose independence or objectivity. Now, I'm here to tell you that just because you develop relationships with people does not mean that you lose your independence or objectivity. Okay, it doesn't mean that. They are not mutually exclusive. You can have relationships with people and still be independent and objective. But the problem is, and again, this is the beating the dead horse part of it, is when people refuse to develop relationships with people in their organization because they feel like they can't do that. Okay. And standing up and saying, well, I'm sorry, I can't have a relationship with you because I have to be objective, actually hurts your reputation as well. Okay. Because it shows that you're not a team player. And in organizations today, we have to be a team player. Okay. And like I said, and it's not just, the relationships that you're having with other stakeholders, but also the relationships with your staff and with yourself. And again, you're going to hear me say this over and over again, is your relationships with yourself, with your stakeholders, and with your staff are important. And in fact, I think it is some of the most important things that you need to be focusing on at this time, is actually learning how to develop and maintain those relationships. Now, I'm sure some of you have seen, as we've moved into a more virtual work environment, that a lot of the relationships that you had before maybe are starting to get strained, or they're just not being developed because you're not seeing or doing things with people as you did before. And that's normal. It doesn't mean that we don't do the relationships. It just means that we need to be more intentional in what we are actually doing to develop and maintain those relationships. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit on one of the other bullet points as we go forward. Now, the second one, again, where a lot of people are really trying to beat a dead horse, is they're continuing to do traditional internal audit work. They're worried about the standards. They're worried about only doing assurance work, and putting that ahead of what is really most important in your organization. So, stop trying to push that traditional internal audit approach forward in your organizations Instead, switch and become much more proactive and much more risk-based in what you're doing. Okay. And what that's going to mean a lot of times is it can look different for different people. But honestly, most of the executives in your organization don't care about how many transactions you looked at. They already know how many transactions are going on. They already realize that some things are not working. They're focused more on the strategic, higher level, higher risk items. And that's where we should be focusing more of our attention. Okay. Now, I know a lot of people will come back to me and say, but I don't know how to audit it, or there's not a process in place for me to be able to audit it. Well, this is again is the question now between the mix of assurance and consulting or advisory work, whatever term you want to use, that you do. But here's kind of the thought process that you should be going through. What are the key initiatives? What are the key strategies? What are the key objectives for the organization? And what can I do to try to help make sure that those things are being met? Now, what it might be is, again, we go to an executive, we find out what it is, we start talking about the process, and we realize there isn't a process in place, which means we can't actually audit a process that doesn't exist. Now, again, under traditional audit, we would say, oh, we can't audit that area, so we're going to ignore it. We're going to put our head in the sand. We're going to pretend that it doesn't exist. Excuse me, because we can't audit it. Right? The right approach is, oh, there's no process in place. Let's help see what we can do to put a process in place that will give that executive leader more comfort over that particular area. So do an assurance or do a consulting or advisory project in that area. And then later come back after the process is up and running and actually provide assurance on it. But again, don't keep, pushing and thinking that the way traditional internal auditing has been done is relevant in the future, because it is not. Most of the standards, most of the ways that people are still auditing are a vestige left over from how people audited 100 years ago. Okay. We shouldn't be auditing like they did 100 years ago. That's just no longer relevant in today's environment. Okay. So stop beating that traditional audit. I've got to follow the standards. I've got to get a QAIP. I've got to do all these things, and that's going to make you valuable to your organization. It is not. Your organization doesn't care whether you're following standards. They care whether you're actually helping and adding value. And a risk-based proactive approach is going to get you to those value areas. Okay, that's 2 that I've gone through right now. And don't worry, on 3, I'm not going to pull out the gun and shoot anybody. In fact, I don't even own a gun. So there we go. But little callback from the previous joke. Some of you will get it and think it's funny. Others of you will think that I'm just crazy. Okay. Third one that I want to go through is related to the audit plan. And I know that a lot of you may be going through or developing kind of an audit plan for this next year. And again, one of the areas where I see people kind of tripping up is not believing that you can take input from management. Now, what do I mean? Because again, I'm sure, most of you are probably asking management, what are the highest risks? What's most important? But I find that most of the people that I talk to really ignore most of that information. They already pretty much have planned out what they think they need to audit. And again, this goes back to our independence and objectivity issue, is that some people feel like if management suggests an audit, that we can't do it, right? Because we're independent, we decide what's on the audit plan, and so they don't really take the advice from their executive or senior leaders. That's a big mistake, folks, because again, those things that your executive management, your board, your senior managers are concerned with, those are exactly the areas where we should be focusing our efforts. And I'll tell you, especially with all of the changes that have happened in the world this last year, if your audit plan looks almost anything like it did from previous years, you're focusing on the wrong areas, because there has been a lot that has changed in the world. And the risks this year versus last year are completely different for a lot of your organizations. And so you really need to take more of that advice from management, because here's another thing: it's going to be more relevant work because it's actually something that they are interested in. And if you can help them with what they're interested in or the challenges that they have, that's when you're going to be more relevant. That's when you're going to be adding more value to your organization as well. Okay, so that's number 3. Now, the fourth one is one that may be a hard pill for many of you to swallow. But again, I see this over and over again, and I keep seeing people driving down this road, and this road will not lead to your success. And that is trying to believe that when there are problems, you need to work on others instead of working on yourself. Okay. Now, this can come up in different ways, right? Like, again, maybe you have a relationship issue with a particular executive. And so you think, well, I'm going to go fix this executive. I'm going to go convince them that they're wrong and we're right. That, again, is the wrong approach. The relationship with that stakeholder will not change until you change yourself. In fact, changing ourselves is really the only thing that we can control. But here's the beautiful irony of the whole thing: is as you change yourself, you change the world around you. And so again, whether it's a stakeholder, maybe it's somebody on your staff that you're having some performance issues with. Most of the people around us reflect back what we are doing. And when we identify those things in other people, we think we need to fix it. However, if we fix ourselves in that way, usually the problem tends to go away. Okay. So as an example, right? Maybe if you have somebody who is making snide comments. Maybe they're not being a team player. Maybe they're trying to, just do what they want instead of being a team player. Okay. Now, our first inclination as a leader or as a manager is to try to get that person to become a team player. But instead of doing that, I want you to do a little timeout, and I want you to think, how good of a team player am I being? Because as I said, most of the time, the people around you are just mirroring what you are doing. And so if you work on yourself, if you become a better team player, usually the other person just falls right in line and becomes a team player as well. Okay. And again, as I said, this can relate to different stakeholder relationships you have. It can relate to your staff. Heck, it can even relate to your personal relationships in your life as well. But I know that a lot of times there is a hesitancy to actually admit that we are probably the biggest part of the problem. And that's why, again, you hear me talking over and over again about lifelong learning, about personal development, and how important these things are. But I'll tell you, from doing this for decades and for working with lots of executives and business owners over the years and helping to coach them, when you change yourself, you change the world around you. And as I told you to begin with, I know sometimes this is a bitter pill, or a jagged little pill, if we bring in Alexis Morris on this from Jagged Little Pill record, but it's really true. And the problem is, if you're not trying to develop yourself, if you're not trying to improve yourself every single day, it shows up. And I know a lot of times we think, well, I've gotten to this point. I know all my stuff. In fact, one of the executives that I worked with, he was in charge of HR at an organization, and he used to tell me, I don't get any training because the company hired me with all of the knowledge that I needed to. And so I don't want to go get training because that would, make them think that I don't already know how to do my job. And that's just one of the silliest things that I ever heard. Of course, he didn't last in the organization very long with those kind of attitudes as well. But, instead of trying to change others, start trying to change yourself first. And so, again, this can be for you personally, but also even think about it from your team perspective. Okay. Instead of trying to maybe change the perception of internal audit at other people with other people by trying to educate them and show them how much value we have, think about maybe changing yourself so that you're a little bit more relevant, so that your team is more relevant to the organization, instead of trying to educate or convince somebody else that we actually are. And that ends up going a long, long ways. Now, what that's going to mean is sometimes you've got to do some work. And sometimes we're just lazy and we don't want to do it. Sometimes it means that we're going to have to invest in training or invest in programs or invest in a coach. But I will promise you this. For every dollar that you put into investing in things like this for yourself, you get back in 10 or if not 100 times that in future benefit. Okay. So, again, start working on yourself, making sure that you're working on yourself every day, every week. When these problems come up or these challenges come up, start to think about how may I actually be responsible for this as well, and what you can actually do a little bit different as you go forward. Okay, so those are some of the myths that I kind of wanted to go through today. Some of the areas where, again, I see that people just continue to try to push forward, but I'm telling you, the horse is already dead. So quit trying it. Quit trying to do just traditional internal auditing. That horse is dead. It's already dead. Quit beating on it. Let's just move forward, be more proactive, be more risk-based in what you're doing. Instead of standing up and trying to say, I'm objective, you can't tell me what to do, I can't have a relationship with you, stop and think about where and how you can improve your relationships. And if you're not sure how to do that, because I'm telling you, sometimes it's kind of difficult, there's places for you to go and ways for you to actually learn how to do that, right? In fact, I've got a whole executive leadership program that walks through 52 different points of focus that you need to actually understand, you need to practice, and you actually need it to become second nature if you want to become a relationship ninja. If you want to be able to have relationship with people, if you want to influence them, if you want to be able to move them, you need to understand how to actually do this. But it means you're going to have to invest in yourself. You're going to have to invest some time. You're going to have to invest some money, because it's just like, if I wanted to start playing tennis today, I can't just go read a book on it and think in my mind and all of a sudden I can play tennis. I'm going to have to go get some lessons, right? I already understand some of the basics, but I'm probably going to have to go get some lessons. I'm going to have to get some training. I'm going to have to hire a coach or somebody to be able to help me to train and learn how to play tennis. Okay, but that's not enough either. I actually have to go out and practice as well. Okay, because you have to put in the time every day, every week, in order to be able to learn fully and actually be able to develop those skills so that they become second nature. Okay. And that's, again, this leadership program that I'm talking about, that's exactly what it does, because in 30 minutes or less a week, you end up actually exercising and practicing these things as well, so that they start to become second nature. And when you do, what you will start to notice is everything around you starts to change. That executive that you were having a hard time dealing with, that maybe was a pain in the ass, all of a sudden things start changing in that relationship. If you've got people on your staff that you've been, again, having difficulties with, all of a sudden those relationships start to improve. But in order for that to happen, it has to start with you. All right. So with that, my friends, I'm going to wrap up this week. Quit beating dead horses. The horse doesn't deserve it anymore, and you don't deserve or need to waste your energy or damage your reputation or relevance of internal audit in your organization anymore. I know the profession is out there still telling you to do a lot of these things, but it's wrong. Okay. And the reason I'm becoming more and more vocal about this is I love this profession. I love the people in the profession, and I'm tired of seeing people get hurt by following some of that advice, because it really is damaging the reputation and relevance that we have in many of our organizations when you're following some of that advice. So instead, my friends, I wish you the best. I want you to have success in your life and in your career, and I'm here to help you along the way. Keep on listening. Send me messages again. Even if you hate it and you think, Jason, you're full of shit, send me a message. Let me know that, because at least I know you're listening. And that's what I'm trying to do. And again, like from today's episode, is not to try to beat you up because I love you. What I'm trying to do is just get you to think and start thinking about the ways that you can improve yourself so that you can have a better life and a better career. So with that, I will catch you on the next episode. Have a great rest of your week, my friend. And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you later on the next show. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C-Risk Academy at ondemand.criskacademy.com. And that's C as in the letter C, riskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you also will have access to the video version of today's show. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.